Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. The leader of the free world, the citadel of democracy, USA, is essentially a glittering palace, rotten to the core, and it has recently proved itself to be a bigoted, intolerant nation where the veneer of decency is always punctured. This nation prides itself on being a nation of laws. But then the recent events and its past conduct, whether in the persecution of the Latin Americans or its interference in Korea, Vietnam, anywhere, shows that it's not a nation of laws, it's a nation of flaws. And if it was not that, would you have believed that Biden's inauguration, day after tomorrow, tomorrow, there are 25,000 troops guarding Washington. Currently, there are 5,000 troops in Afghanistan and Iraq combined, where this country has been fighting for more than 16 years. And 5 times more troops than there are in Iraq and Afghanistan combined are in Washington only. If it was a nation of laws, would it require that many housekeepers to protect the streets of Washington? Just day before yesterday, there is non-profit organization called Fund for Peace released Fragile States Index. This refers to the international study which shows which countries are fragile, where in the last 10 years, people have become more anxious and the countries have become unstable. Would you believe USA is among the top 20 countries where pressures have grown significantly? And USA also shows a stark drop in what the index labels as cohesion as indicators that reflect the internal division. When the sixth president of USA, John Quincy Adams, called USA a nation of laws, possibly he was not able to foresee what would happen with the advent of the 46th president. The times from Eisenhower onwards or Reagan onwards have shown that the reality of USA being a nation of flaws is more correct, more justified, more pertinent, more logical than being a nation of laws. The wild scenes that the world witnessed during the Black Lives Matter movement, not in one country, county or in one state, but practically all over, where the police was asked to stand down, where arson, murder, looting, robbery became the order of the day, where the laws were put in the cold storage. The press, the word talks about the riots in Washington. Yes, it was abominable. I agree. The wild signs that we saw in the Capitol building in Washington were the shocking manifestation of those flaws which have been there and which we have been witnessing. 28 times there has been such scenes earlier, though the media never talked about it. As a matter of fact, even the leaders of the Democratic Party used to say, and Nancy Pelosi is on the record of saying, that how can there be a protest if there is no destruction of property? Kamala Harris started a fund to bail out the criminals arrested during the arsons committed by the Black Lives Matter. It is no secret then that the model Athenian democracy of the ancient Greeks, if you compare that to the modern American democracy, we would find that this is a nation baked in flaws. The modern American democracy in reality is decidedly based on unmodern, unsavory plinths of slavery and racism. You cannot deny that the founding fathers of USA were the slave owners, slave drivers. Before that, there were no Negroes in USA. And nowhere is the racist history more evident than in, say, in state of Georgia, which is set in the 18th century. For the first time elected its first ever African American senator, Reverend Warnock. Small, unpretentious as it is, you might pass this search without a second glance. But if you did so, you would be making a mistake, for this place of worship is in fact world famous. People come to see, to learn some lessons of history. Why? One of the earliest pastors of the church was none other than Martin Luther King Jr. And he was a pastor after his father died. King made this modest red brown building a nerve center for the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s. And that degenerated into Black Lives Matter movement today. So this is a living history where laws were created to be flouted, where there's more sympathy with the offender than with the victim. So the experience of the Black Lives Matter and the current Washington Royals is revealing. This, for example, let's say the impact of Martin Luther, whose anniversary was celebrated yesterday. And if you study Luther, King rather, you would find the dominant presence of Gandhi, the six principles of the philosophy of nonviolence, embossed in bold letters on the wall between the church and the museum. A whole floor devoted to Gandhi, Nehru, and Indian leaders of the freedom movement. When I visited, I saw Charkha in one of the glass cabinets, along with other paraphernalia. But what's the reality? I remember reading Martin and Corita King's historic pilgrimage to India. When he said that some years ago, Nehru was telling me that his nation is handling the difficult matter of untouchables, a problem not unrelated to American Negro delight. And the Prime Minister admitted that many Indians still harbor prejudice against these long oppressed people, and they do. But that has become unpopular to show this prejudice. Now, see, in India, it has become a crime and also socially prohibited banned, barred to show prejudice. But not in USA. It's a crime, all right. Racist is covered in being into a hate crime. But if the two applicants compete for entrance into college university, you can be sure that the school or the college would be forced to accept the untouchable in India, not in America, because laws are more often observed in their being breached in the intention of flaws. As a matter of fact, India has also its terrible moments, whether it was the riots around the Mandal Commission judgment, Ayodhya riots, Shaheen Bagh, or the farmer riots. But there's ample irony around that. So, does it mean that all nations which are basically democratic and believe in democracy as a principle, they suffer from being more afflicted with flaws than with laws? There are three major points to be made. The first is that the laws in a democracy are usually made with fine intentions that they'll keep injustice at bay. But the section of the population inevitably remains unconvinced because there are sections of society which can breach the law and yet keep on leading a normal life. The long arm of the law hardly ever reaches them. And that's why the majority of the population believes that the law itself is flawed. So, for this reason, if there's a rebellion, anger, it can be simmering below the surface or it can break out any moment. And we have seen that the people speak up against the reservations in India. And the same resentment is there of the whites against the blacks, that the blacks are being unfairly promoted. Nobody denies that they have been exploited for a long time. Nobody does. But then there comes a time when you have got to see and bury the past rather than keep on reminding people and rewarding the people for the suffering of their ancestors. That is ridiculous. You reward a great grandson because his great grandfather had suffered. That's ridiculous. So, the recent violence over the white rage in USA is similar to the protest by the general category in India who protest against the reservations. And the reservations are by law granted in constitution. So India becomes a nation of law, uh, laws being violated, and same is happening in USA. You cannot deny it. As a matter of fact, this is the basic thing. Secondly, if we describe 1963, the year when the March on Washington took place, the first riot, Kennedy was assassinated. And then King had written that the time and circumstance and the mood of a people come together. And now we see that the country has not come together. USA is divided, is polarized. Trumpism on one side and fake socialism, pseudo socialism on the other. They are in conflict and the people are divided. And the division is a very balanced division. If you look at the voting that took place recently, the share is almost on the difference is 0.5% or less. Thirdly, the leaders in both countries, whether it was King in USA or Gandhi in India, they had a way with words that could make people sit up, make people stand up and say, yes, we follow you. But that was transitory in nature. The final sentence of the famous book published by the king declares very enigmatically, non-violence, the answer to a Negro's needs, may become answer to the most desperate need of all the world. And nobody can deny that King was a master orator. And what was the desperate need of all the humanity? And the statement that non-violence is likely a solution is acceptable. There's no harm in that. But then look at the present era of COVID 19, where all the humanity does suffer the need, desperate need to share, not just the vaccine, but basically the feeling of empathy. Whatever appears missing is the real recipe for empathy. And the reality is, let's accept it, that the violence, the demonstrations, the looting, the property damage, whether in India or in USA, because both democracies have the same issue, makes one thing clear. Word cannot make wait much longer for these democracies. And they make up one fifth of the global population. So the world, the humanity cannot take long to ensure that these countries take a stand and figure out the essential connection between desperate need and non-violent ways of meeting those needs. These democracies are flawed by definition, and that flaw is that they privilege error-prone voter perception. Gandhi and King had proved that they were the glorious best when their laws vigorously grapple with the intrinsic flaws in human nature. But the state laws, when they deal with the intrinsic flaws, are defeated, and the nations lose their status as a nation of laws, and then they degenerate as USA has degenerated, and India might shortly meet the same fate if the nation of laws becomes a nation of flaws. And that's a tragedy for the people, tragedy for the country, tragedy for the world as a whole. It's time to remove the flaws. It's a time to implement the laws, laws that make people realize that whatever the differences may be, they are equal before law. And the mighty arm of justice would not differentiate whatever the reason may be. Is it hoping too much? I don't think so. Do you think that way? And if you think, and majority of the people think, then the nations can come out of this morass of being a nation of flaws and convert themselves into a nation of